Hello, my name is Jeremy Schmidt. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Geography at Durham University, and I'm joined today by Elizabeth Johnson, Jessica Lehman, and Phil Steinberg to discuss their new paper that appeared in Theory and Event in January 2021, which is now a month known for more than just breaking the internet through sea shanties. Phil, Elizabeth, and Jesse published a paper together called Turbulent Waters in 3 parts that the editors for the special issue describe as reshaping turbulence as a metaphorical concept from 3 perspectives, focusing on the complex relationships between metaphor and materiality in regard to oceanic worlds. Through thorough cross-scalar and cross-disciplinary metaphorical considerations of turbulence in its relation to maritime historical knowledge production, the governance of and epistemic cultures of ocean life, and the lines and laws of the ocean, this contribution shows how turbulence, if thought collaboratively and in its material and discursive performativity, produces different possibilities for how we think from, with, and in relation to the sea. And with that introduction, I thought it would be great to hear more directly from Phil, Jesse, and Elizabeth about how this paper came to be, what it argues, and what might come from future aspects of their current collaborations.
Right. Well, really, the origin of the paper came in many ways from just this realization that not really by design, we had this kind of unusual concentration at Durham Geography of people who were thinking with the ocean, not just thinking about the ocean, but actually thinking with the ocean to understand the broader world out there. Specifically in my own work, that usually has meant thinking with the ocean's geophysical properties, with the way that the ocean moves, with its liquidity, with its volume. And in fact, when Theory and Event sort of said, would you think about this more as a metaphor? It brought the 3 of us together and sort of thought, actually, we're all thinking with the ocean in fairly different ways. Elizabeth is thinking much more with its biological properties, and Jesse much more with its sort of embedded histories and meanings. And those 3 work together, but they also work in tension with each other a little bit. So after a little bit of discussion of how do we write something together to actually bring that together into a composite sort of analysis, we realized actually our strength is almost in recognizing our differences and letting those differences knock up against each other themselves as a form of turbulence, which led us to write in an actually fairly experimental way, writing 3 kind of mini pieces that we then tried to find the common threads throughout. But in its own way, that itself was kind of a metaphor, if not maybe a metaphor for turbulence, because it fortunately was not that turbulent a writing process, but it was generative in the sense that turbulence is. Jesse?
Thanks. Yeah, I'll just pick up right from there. I think that the main message and the thing that for me became clear through the writing process was really how generative a concept turbulence is. And this helped us to think in more detail about this relationship between matter and metaphor, and to think about how the ocean's materiality, the matter of turbulence, impacts the ways that we think about all of the various things that we study, Jeremy mentioned, but also to think about how the metaphors that we use, the metaphor of turbulence, can also impact our understandings of materiality and how these things are never quite separable. The generative nature of turbulence also came in its availability for us as a kind of scale jumping metaphor and matter that allowed us to not just move across the different sites of the different things that we study, the different areas that we study, but also really to think about turbulence from the molecular to world systems, and to think really crucially about the relationships between these different scales. And then I think the other thing that, the last thing I'll mention is kind of a main message from the article, was that really carefully attending to turbulence as a phenomenon also disrupted for us some of the binaries between what Deleuze and Guattari might call smoothness and striation. So it helped us to think in real detail about the materiality of turbulence as something that disrupts, that is about movement, is about chaos in some senses, but isn't kind of purely chaos or purely movement. And to thinking about kind of like some of the ways that oceanographers think about turbulence, and how there are these kinds of moments of order or observable patterns within the kind of churn of turbulence. So I think these are some of the kind of takeaway messages and the things that writing the article also helped me to think more deeply about. Yeah, so Elizabeth will finish us up.
So Jeremy has asked us to consider what the kind of next steps are and the way forward is past this article and where our collaboration is going. As Phil mentioned kind of at the beginning, our collaboration together has been something of a surprise, I think, to all of us, an unplanned but incredibly generative coming together of scholars working on the ocean in different ways. And even with this article, I think we've had a generative but loose collaboration. And our way forward is sort of similarly yet to be determined in many ways. But in thinking about sort of where we're going and what comes out of having collaborated on this particular project together, I've been thinking about how our piece really draws attention to some of not just what we say in the paper are the onto-epistemological variations of thinking with turbulence on these different and through these different registers of history, geophysical properties, and biologies within the ocean. But I was also thinking about how we're all uniquely situated as geographers to pay considerable attention also to methodology. And I think as geographers, we are uniquely positioned between a kind of theoretical commitment to understanding the graphing of the geo and also a commitment to empirical analysis. And that's part of what the paper I think does really well, is that it allows us to see very clearly that taking up the question of turbulence, or even what Phil and Kimberly Peters previously have called wet ontologies, what taking up those wet ontologies in different registers requires of us differently and leads us to sort of in different directions. And in having written the paper and in seeing it in conversation with other writings on Matter4 in the special issue, I think we are uniquely placed to give some sort of serious consideration to methodological variation as well as onto-epistemological variation within the study of not just the oceans, but in the tension between studying matter and materiality on one hand and kind of politics, social, and cultural sort of dimensions on the other hand. So I think moving forward, that's something that I'd like to pay attention to. And in addition to that, I think we're going to be, we kind of have like we said, a kind of loose collaboration. We'll be doing some reading groups moving forward, and we'll see where it takes us.
This is fantastic. And I think for those of us who have had a chance to read the paper, indicative of just what a rich set of ideas and conversations went into it. And for people who are watching this video on YouTube, you can find the paper on any of the staff profiles for Jessie, Phil, or Elizabeth. If you're watching this on our website, you can just click the link to the side of this video to be taken straight to the paper. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll look forward to seeing where this turbulence leads us in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeremy.